Welcome to the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we dive into the fundamentals of readiness for life's challenges, covering topics from personal responsibility to mental and physical preparedness and beyond. Let's forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility on the journey to the well prepared life. Sweet. Well, welcome to episode 3 of the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we work on what it looks like to forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility as we seek to live this well-prepared life. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Kyle.
And we get to talk to you about what this looks like in our lives and hopefully give you some tools and abilities to do that. Today, we're going to kind of talk about this idea of like, what kind of person are you? We introduced the well-prepared life in the first episode. We talked last week about like, what do you want? Like, what do you actually want in life? And what does it take to get there some? And then this week, we want to lean into this idea of like, are you the type of person that's going to actually go after what you want?
Yeah. Okay.
And like, what kind of person are you? Because we all start from somewhere. It's kind of like, again, that starting point that we talked about, and in like building out your map and where you want to go, you got to know where you start. And so who are you? What are the things that are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What kind of personality do you have?
Okay.
And so that's kind of the thing we're going to jump into. And kind of go through it from a couple different resources that we've talked about. There's a guy that I know who has a podcast, and he has a section of those podcasts called Know Thyself. And so we're going to use some of his tools that he talks about. And he just has some ideas about like methods of like ways that you, like how do you do life, how do you tick, strengths and weaknesses, and some magnets, things that draw you or don't. And so this is kind of the frame and lens that we're going to look at this through a little bit as well. But kind of jumping into this, one of the questions is like, how do you tick? Like, how do you think? What do you look like? What are kind of like, if somebody's like never really thought about that much before, what are like the first things that you would maybe ask them, or steps that you would like encourage them to take to start like learning about themselves in that way, and like learning how they tick and how they think?
Or like, what are your interests? What do you like doing? I don't know. Maybe I don't know about the time. What time you wake up in the morning? Are you an early riser? Because that says a lot about someone. Are you a night owl? Are you an early riser? Yeah, there's a couple questions. How about what you got?
Yeah. Like I love the things like what makes you angry.
Okay.
And what makes you happy.
Yeah.
As far as like what like takes you from a 0 to a 10 the fastest.
Okay.
In almost any category. So if
off.
you say like, as far as from an anger perspective, what takes you from a 0 to 10, but also like from a happiness perspective, what takes you from a 0 to 10? Like when you see that, you're just like, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And excitement.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one, extroverted, introverted.
Okay.
Do you
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
getting along, do you get recharged from being around other people, or do you get recharged by being alone, reading a book kind of thing? So
yeah. And if you've never heard of the term extroverted, introverted, which I'd be a little bit surprised by that. It's pretty common now.
Right.
I'd say like 10 years ago, it was like a little bit less known, but at this point, most of us, if not all of us, have heard about it. But if you haven't, basically introverted and extroverted are like often talked about as ways that people interact with others. But actually they're ways that you feel and how you get recharged when interacting with other people.
Okay.
So introverted would be when I'm around people, that takes energy, and I am tired after being around people. That does not mean that I'm not good at talking to people,
Right.
or that I'm a loner, or that I don't like being around people.
Okay.
It just means that when I'm around people, it's tiring for me,
Right.
and I have to be more alone or with a very small group of people to recharge. That's where I fall. Is that I like having a small group of like 1 or 2 or 3 people that I'm really close with,
Yeah.
and that's where I get like the most life and recharge. I'm actually like being alone is not that great for me.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's where I'm like, I've actually taken, there's Myers-Briggs is one of these tests that talks about this, and I've taken it a couple times. And like one time I was like 0.0, like I was like 0.1 on the extroverted side, and the other time I was like 0.5, like 5 on the introverted side. So I'm like kind of right close to the middle, but I definitely like small groups if I'm going to be in a group.
So you just brought up a good point. So these identifications, I guess, of your personality, they can change as you grow, as you get older? Or you kind of
typically not with introverted extrovertedness.
Okay.
I tend to sit more at the middle, so that's where it's like there's some flex depending on like if I've been doing stuff with people for a lot and I was to take that test, it'd probably call me introverted because I'm like more tired.
Okay.
But I've been like if it was like middle of COVID, post COVID, and I haven't been around anybody for a while, I might be like I need some people.
Right.
Like as far as like I need relationship, need community.
Yeah.
Because introverted extroverts need community too. Like as far as that's not an extrovert thing only.
Yeah.
So that's the introverted side as far as people that it takes energy to be around people. And then the extroverted side is people that where it's like when you're around people, it energizes you. Like it fills you up to be around people. These and like the thing that tricks people up and with this is typically the people who are more extroverted also tend to be very relationally focused as far as they're like the life of the party. They're a lot of fun to be around.
Yeah.
And I would say that does tend to be the case. Like it's a stereotype for a reason.
Right.
But that's not always the case as far as somebody could be the life of the party and then goes home and is like, I'm dead.
Right. Not doing anything for a week.
Yeah. But an extroverted person could also be really awkward, but also like needs to be around people in order to like be energized. So it's like both of those things can be true.
What about the question, are you a dog person or a cat person? How does that tell you anything about yourself?
Yeah, I would shy away from cat people. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it might.
Yeah.
Especially if you attribute that to any of your personality and how you think about things.
Yeah. Independent. You don't like to, like to please people. You're a cat person.
Yeah. So it might be like, that's definitely a question to ask to like get to know yourself. Like, what kind of person are you in that?
It's good.
So that's kind of this like idea of like, how do you tick? What do you think? And I would encourage you, like we talked about Myers-Briggs a little bit, but I would encourage if you're like not sure where to start, you're like, I don't even know what questions to ask. Myers-Briggs is probably like the easiest entry level. I've heard of a thing recently called like CORE, CORE. I don't remember what they all stand for. My father-in-law is like certified in it, so that's why I've heard a lot about it recently. He really loves it. I'm not just an O. I was like the operations kind of like high person, and so he's like, that's your O coming out. I'm like, that's not my identity.
Right, that's something else to be careful of.
Yeah,
just because you identify with a certain personality doesn't mean you can't grow in others.
Yeah, no, and that's where
change it.
When like the Enneagram is another one. That one is more so just for yourself. I would not like. There's a whole thing about like don't type other people, don't do this, and that kind of applies to other things because you need to be careful about like categories and like where it's like it's easy to put people in a category based on personality tests, and so take that with like this is a way to learn about yourself, not a way to put you in a box.
That's right. I was just about to say that, the box.
Yeah. And so use those tools that are available. I had the opportunity a few years ago to take something called the Birkman personality test, which apparently I got it like for either half off or free. I forget how much it was. It's significant discount, but it's one of those. It's like you have to have like an actual like assessor that works through it with you.
Oh wow.
It's like if you were to buy it new, it's like $300 to $500 to like take the test. And I got like a book out of it. That was like probably a 25 to 50 page book that just had all of the questions and I had like assessments and interpretations and analyzed like my answers. And I called it for a while the Book of Me because it described it. And there's a couple of things that it pointed out that I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like I'm a control freak. I've used to be worse. I tend in that way now anyway. But like at one point, my wife, we were dating at the time, but she said that she signed me up for clogging lessons and signed me up without my input or anything. She just decided, hey, Nathan, guess what I did? I did like for a date for us. I was like, what?
You a big clogger? You like to dance?
I don't dance at all. And so this blew up. Like, thankfully, I didn't like yell at her or anything, but like I had so much energy around like, I can't believe you did this to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what am I going to like, as far as like, why would you ever think that that's okay? And I just had so much energy around this to the point where she like ended up like feeling like really bad about it and apologizing for it. A couple of years later, I took this test, and one of the things it says is like, one of the things that makes you feel out of control is when people make calls without your input.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
It's like when people make decisions for me without involving me, very difficult for me.
Interesting. You don't mind if you have a say in it.
Yeah.
If they come up with the idea.
Yeah. If somebody else comes with the idea and I get to kind of be like, even just a stamp of approval.
Right.
Be like, yep, I'm on board.
Yeah.
Like, don't mind that at all. But when somebody's just like, hey, I signed you up for this thing, I'd be like, huh?
Yeah. It's interesting. Okay.
So that's like an example of something I learned about myself through a test like this. Now that was an advanced one. And if you have the opportunity to take one of the bigger ones, I would say they are much more worth it.
Okay.
Because they're much more accurate. They're much more helpful. They have a lot more information with them.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'd recommend taking a paid version of like Myers-Briggs or something like that. Like another one is Strengths Finders.
Yeah. Okay.
Really solid test that they've done. I've done it a couple times. And they have the book Strength Finders 2.0 that lists all the strengths, but you can take the test and be like, okay, what are my top 5? And then if you pay a little more, you can actually see like, where do all of them rank based on how I took this test.
Okay.
And so Strength Finders is great, but the reason why the paid ones are better is they're like tested and reliable, versus the other ones may be somewhat accurate, but oftentimes it's like people taking stuff from those and just throwing it all together.
But in a Google Doc.
And so it's not as vetted.
Yeah.
Would be the thing. So you might have an answer that doesn't at all apply or be helpful.
What about scams? Like, how do I know that what I'm doing is trusted? You know, it's like, oh, Myers-Briggs exam for $10. How do I know I'm not just giving $10 to a website that
just
is not vetted?
Do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
If you really, really care, call them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like call them and talk to somebody on the phone.
Yeah.
There's enough out there at this point that it's not too difficult to like confirm like, oh, this is a good thing. Like if you look up like Myers-Briggs and get Myers-Briggs official,
right,
like that's more likely to be the scam. Don't take something that says like, get your like copy of Myers something. Like as far as make sure it's like Myers-Briggs.com or whatever the equivalent is,
right.
StrengthFinders.com.
Yeah.
Get the most like original like option as possible.
Okay.
If it has any extra characters or stuff with it, avoid those.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Bam. So talking about StrengthsFinder a little bit, that leads into the idea of like strengths and weakness. So you have the idea of like personality type, how you think, but then you have another area of like strengths and weaknesses. So like kind of thinking through this, what are some of like the weaknesses that you've had to like I need to work on?
Oh man. Yeah, so recently I found out I'm a little bit negative. I'm a bit critical of a person. I always thought I was pretty optimistic, like, oh yeah, we're going to get this done. But it's kind of, I'll point out every bad thing that can possibly happen with it. And then, yeah, some people take that as being too critical. One weakness is talking over people.
Okay.
I talk before I listen, so I trying to do better at that. The other one, and the joy as well, trying to find joy instead of being critical. Yeah. So trying to do that.
What are some strengths that you found in yourself that you've learned about, that you've just over the years, you've like, oh, this is something I'm good at?
That's a good question. Strengths, I learn fairly well. I learn fairly easily. Like if it's a new skill, just learning the application of it kind of thing. I like to learn the whole picture. I found that I have pretty decent like reading and writing ability.
Okay. So
like keeping grammar, and clearly I don't speak that well, but writing a report, I can say, I wouldn't put like in there or in that. So, how about you? What are some strengths and weaknesses that you've identified?
I struggle with relating to people well.
Okay.
And so I've always like, especially when I was younger, I found but even now I notice it still. Of like, it's work to like have a conversation with somebody that I don't know.
Yeah.
About a topic that I'm not that interested in.
Yeah.
Or that I'm just unaware of. And so like that's made it where, and I'm also not been good at like empathizing with people.
Okay.
And so like those two things kind of played together where it's like, I don't like, the reality is, and this is kind of a harsh one, of a lot of the time I'm like, I don't really care that much about people's feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the extreme.
So like there's been times in my life where it's like I've lived my life where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to ask you to do this, and if you feel bad about it, it's too bad. Like that's what you're supposed to do.
We got to get it done.
We got to get it done.
Yeah.
And so like that's come out, and like I've like had no chill at certain parts of my life. Like I was a worship leader for a while, and we'd have rehearsal, and I was the guy that would text them like 5 minutes before rehearsal, be like, hey, are you on your way?
Okay.
Like so this is before, this is before the time that they're supposed to be there. I'm texting them, hey, are you close?
Make sure they're on their way. Yeah.
Because I'm like, you should have been here 5 minutes before.
Now, some people need that. Like I'm one of those people that need
it. Yes and no.
Like, oh crap, I forgot about time.
If you have like somebody that's like, hey, shoot me a text, reach out to me. Like I just want, it's helpful for me. Sure.
Yeah.
When I'm doing that to like anybody that's ever late.
Right.
And I'm doing it every week for a repeated weekly thing. That's one thing to have a conversation with somebody that is repeatedly late and be like, hey, are you like, by doing this, you're showing that you're not respecting the people's time here.
Right.
So that's one thing.
Some feedback.
That's not what I was doing.
Yeah. Okay.
I was like, why aren't you here yet?
Right. Not kind at all.
Yeah. And so that's like one weakness that I've had to work on in my life.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing, man. That's good. Strengths though.
Yeah. I've always like leaned towards like being pretty decisive and having like pretty good confidence.
Yeah.
So I'm learning a little bit about myself that I think there might be some deeper layers of insecurity in certain areas as far as like needing to prove myself a little bit. But in a lot of my life, that's not really presented itself. And it is there, it's very deep, but that's like more recent. I'm like, oh, maybe that's driven by a little bit of insecurity.
Yeah.
But I haven't felt that way so much as like, no, I make decisions and I stick with them, and oftentimes they're the right decisions.
Yeah.
And like I find it easy to like walk into something with confidence,
Right.
And to move forward. I'm good at like high level organization and like building systems and building teams, and so I really love that, and that's a part of my job here. And I pick up new things really quick. Like I watch somebody do it, and I can typically replicate it with 80% to 90% accuracy right after watching somebody, kind of thing.
That's pretty good then.
And so so that's been super helpful just in life. Of like I learned to play guitar when I was like 10 or 12, and like people got annoyed because like I just watched them play the chord, and I'd figure it out and I just play it. And they're like, cool. It took me weeks to learn that, and you just figure it out in one night. I'm like, well, it just worked.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on strengths becoming weaknesses? So like I could see it, as you're talking about it, you can be very decisive, but that could also be seen as a bulldozer to some people.
Yeah.
And you could be like what you're talking about with like being always on time. You demand that excellence in others, and it could rub people the wrong way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. There's a thought that I've had, and I've heard this somewhere else. I can't remember where I heard it, so it's not an original idea to me. But it's basically this idea of like, it's good to lean into your strengths, but you have to also at least neutralize your weaknesses.
Okay.
And there's this idea that some people have that you need to make your weaknesses your strengths. Okay. Like you need to work on like if it's a weakness, you need to work on it until it's no longer a weakness.
It's like a Michael Scott, like I work too hard and I show up on time, I stay late.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Well, not even that much that, but as far as like if timeliness is your issue, that you need to be the on-time person in every area of your life.
Okay. So you're like,
it's like flip-flop.
Full 180.
Yeah. Where it's like where sure, I need to be at meetings. Like the more reasonable thing would be like, I need to not be late to meetings and appointments.
That's good.
But if I show up to a party late, that's fine.
Okay.
Like as far as like, if I'm at something that's, or if we don't get out of the door quite on time to go out on a date, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like when I was younger, or like when my wife and I were first married, and if we said like, hey, we're going out at 6:30, it's only the two of us.
Yeah.
And we weren't like walking out the door at 6:30. I got stressed.
But you don't have a reservation. Not a reservation. I can understand it's like a nice restaurant.
Yeah, sure. No, this is just for no reservation, just the two of us going out together. I got stressed if we were not leaving when we said we would.
That's funny. Yeah.
And so I had to learn like to chill out a bit.
Yeah.
And like now it's like where it's like if there's somebody that's like consistently on time to something and then they show up late like one time, I'm not really reaching out to them until at least 5 minutes late, and it's to be like, hey, are you okay?
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Like it's
hey, you all right? Yeah.
Like I'm like where it's like, this isn't normal. Are you good?
Yeah.
And then even with the people that are regularly late, it's like I'll still text them, but it'll be like, hey, is everything good? And then it's like if I need to have that conversation, I'll have that in person with them after they're there or at a different time to be like, hey, this is becoming a bit of a pattern. I think we need to work on this.
I think that's good to have one-on-one, like, hey, there's an issue.
Yeah.
Like this is how, I feel when you type statements like I feel like I'm not respected when you show up late kind of thing. Hypothetical.
Yeah. And so that's helpful. Yeah. So that like kind of like the strengths and weaknesses, that was something that I was like not good at and I've gotten a lot better at. But the idea of neutralizing weaknesses. So I'm a big proponent of, and like one of my strengths from the Strengths Finders test is maximizer, which is this idea of actually leaning into and making my strengths better.
Nice.
So this comes naturally to me. And I don't want to like talk about this in a way that's unapproachable to others, but the idea is that you should lean into your strengths. You should work hard at the things that you're best at, because I think that's where you're going to excel at most in life.
Yeah.
But you also need to be careful not to let your weaknesses become an Achilles heel.
That's good. That's good.
Because if you have a weakness, like for me, of not caring for people, I could be a great organizer, a great communicator, very decisive. I can make great decisions on time. I could make things happen. But I could bulldoze people and hurt people and actually not make any progress in life because people realize like, sure, he can get stuff done, but he's not worth being around.
Yeah. Okay.
Like he destroys people and leaves people in like the rubble as he goes through life.
You'd be the best leader of systems or organizer of systems, but if nobody wants to listen to you, they're not going to follow.
Like there's a phrase with leadership specifically. It's like you're only a leader if people are following.
Yeah.
Like as far as you're not. There's no leader of one. As far as like yes, you can lead yourself, but the idea of like unless people are following you, you're not a leader in life.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where it's like we need to work to make sure our weaknesses are not something that like cripple us. But we don't necessarily need to like emphasize our weaknesses. As far as we don't need to like go and make like for relationships. Now, relationships is one that's I would say is like probably one of the only exceptions to this.
Okay.
Because life is relationships.
Okay.
And it's like, if you don't know how to interact with people and care for people, like that's going to hurt you in most of life. And so you need to work at that area specifically to be like, okay, what does it look like to empathize well, or at least to like not ignore people's feelings. Like for me, I'm like, I still don't necessarily know what you're feeling, but I try to work to like, be like, hey, what's going on? What are you thinking?
Yeah. Okay.
An area where it's like less important as far as like there's an area of like, if a weakness of yours is like an actual like handicap, like something like dyslexia, you don't need to be able to write novels and read giant books.
Yeah.
You need to be able to like write a clear and concise email,
right?
And do it in a way that doesn't make you look like a 10-year-old.
Get your thoughts out clearly to where people don't question what you're thinking, but
yeah.
Taken seriously.
Yeah. So like, what's like some weaknesses maybe that you've like, you know what, I've pretty much neutralized this. Are there any ones that you've seen in your life that you're like, you know what, this used to be something that was like really bad, but I've taken it to a level where it's like not really hindering me anywhere, but I don't need to like make it a strength.
That's a good question. Weaknesses that are not weaknesses anymore. Weaknesses that are neutralized. I've got a bad habit of showing up late. I think I've neutralized it a little bit, and that kind of worked. But I'm still pretty late to things often, so I wouldn't say that actually. Man, that's a good question. What are some examples? I might think of one.
Yeah.
You're thinking of.
Like for me, I used to be like terrible at encouraging people.
Okay.
I would only talk about it's a classic thing. It's common with a lot of people, but it's like I only pointed out the negative. I never pointed out the positive. And I've gotten a lot better at like creating it. So the way I neutralize that is I made a point in huddles and times when I like have conversations with people to point out the positive on purpose.
Okay.
So that like in the moment when I think of something negative, like one, it's like I've like tamed it so I'm not like snapping to saying it. But the two, it's like if I'm having opportunities where I point out positive things through more of a system, especially in like on teams where I'm like during huddle, we do shout outs as far as things that we saw that people did well. Okay. And the part of the reason why I do that is so that when I see something negative in the moment, I can say something because I have a time when I'm going to give something positive.
That's good.
And I'm putting deposits in as well. So that's like one area where it's like I've built a system that helps me encourage people because I'm not naturally good at it myself. So I'm not good at encouraging people, but I've built systems that help me keep encouraging people.
So as you're saying that, you said you built a system to keep you from failing miserably. Yeah. So something that I've noticed that's helped me is on my board at work, I have like a whiteboard. And instead of just having a bunch of random stuff on there, I have a to-do list of what I want to get done today. So I think about it, whether it's in my walk into the office or whether it's in my drive, my commute, I just kind of think, okay, here's what I want to get done today. Here's my goal. If it doesn't get done, oh well, but at least I have somewhere to start because previously I'd be very scatterbrained, doing nothing quickly. I'd be doing 20 different things and getting nothing done. So this kind of helps me to get little bite-sized chunks throughout the day. That's something that's helped pretty recently, actually. Yeah.
Another area where I don't see this in my life, but I've seen this happen is the area of like organization in general, where like there are people that I work with where it's like they are super relationally, like their strength are all relationships. They care for people well, they empathize well, they like want to know people's lives and do well at making people feel heard and like invited in. And then they've struggled on like making sure that things meet deadlines and they've struggled on those types of things. Yeah. I think if that's where you lean, where you're like, you know what, I love being around people. I love talking to people. I love getting like time with others. Like when a task is assigned to you at work or when you like say, hey, this thing needs to get done. One of those things I think if you can get good at is making sure that you build in something to help you meet deadlines when you need to set them.
That's good.
Like deadlines and like when that happens, if you are consistently late or consistently not following through, and even more so than deadlines, following through would be the thing. If you don't follow through as far as if you've said you're going to do something and then you don't, that's going to like take away opportunity. Yeah. Like if it's like, if you think you have like an opportunity to work as a salesman in a big company and your boss hands you something and then you don't actually follow through and make that happen, you're not going to be handed opportunities anymore.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and so you
Not
have to
trusted.
like follow through on what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those examples as far as like for somebody that's maybe not as task oriented, not as
Yeah.
organized. It's like you need to get organized enough to follow through, even if you're still not great at it.
That's good. Yeah. I'd say that's been a struggle of mine of like following through. And I've always, so long story, I started saying maybe, leave
yeah.
some room in there for growth. And then I realized that's not good either, because then I'm not committing to something. I'm just not decisive. So then
okay.
I'm trying to work on that, not saying maybe, but just say yes or no, and then make sure my yeses are followed through. That's the struggle now, following through with the
Yeah.
yeses.
So it's like you say maybe, but you actually have to still come like maybe until I think about it more.
Right. Still got to decide.
Maybe another way of putting that is like, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, that's good.
But you actually got to get back to it.
I'll get
That's
back to
the
you
follow
tomorrow.
through.
Yeah, give a timeline
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Give
Yeah.
yourself deadlines. Is
I'll get back to you in an
a great way
hour. Let me think about that.
But yeah, so work on your strengths for sure, and do some work on your weaknesses.
Yeah.
You got to get your weaknesses to a spot where they're not going to like be something that takes you out.
Yeah.
Like for me, there's a time when I was like first starting to lead more people. I was not leading relationally well, and so basically halfway through, this is at school, I was leading a team that we went out and did like student conferences, and halfway through the year, I will say this conflict was not handled well. It was kind of like a little heavy-handed, I think, with how it was presented.
Gotcha.
But basically, and also there was some hidden things as far as like somebody told me about somebody else's problem, and I was like, well, who is it? And they're like, I can't tell you. And I'm like, well, why won't they come to me? That's not healthy either.
Right.
So, but anyway, the basic premise was, hey, this person isn't feeling cared for on your team, and I'm hearing that from other people, and I'm seeing that well. And if this doesn't change, you're probably not going to be leading next year.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
I need to work on that.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And so I like started reading books about like leading well and leading from influence and relationship. I did work.
Yeah. The homework.
And the homework to like learn like, oh, how do you do this well? And I like started doing hangouts with my team and like just times where there was no ask. And it's just a time to like
Just hang out.
and get to know each other and have a good time. The ironic thing about that is everybody on the team still left after that year. Very awkward.
Maybe coincidence.
But I had good conversations with all of them, and maybe one of them was still like a result of my leadership early in the year. But the others all had different opportunities that they wanted to pursue.
Okay.
And
That's good.
so I was like, okay, I feel pretty confident about this. But it was still like I had to like kind of somewhat convince my leader at the time to be like, no, this they didn't leave because of me.
Right.
At least
Yeah.
most of them.
And that's good to ask. You said you had the one-on-one. Did you ask for feedback of like, hey, what could I have done better?
No,
Or
this was
because of me?
something he brought to me.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was like, hey, you need to work on this.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah.
And that happens.
Yeah.
Like that happens in life.
Sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah. And there's something about being resilient too.
Yeah.
Like I would think of myself as somebody that's fairly resilient. And I would say that I think pretty honestly, I think in integrity, be able to say that. And that was I think a good example of a time when that like showed that, where he brought this to me and it hurt. I didn't like it,
Yeah.
but I didn't let it destroy me. I wasn't distraught. In fact, I was like, I'm going to take that as a challenge and I'm going to be like the most relational leader I can be. Like I'm going to like change because of this feedback that I got.
That's good.
And so that's like something like about like just as far as the topics, as far as like forging resilience. Resilience is hard.
Yeah.
And so if you don't ever do anything that's hard or you never challenged, like that's where you build resilience in the challenge. And so that's something that like is an example in my life where I was challenged and I leaned in.
Yeah. I see it like a metal. You're trying to make something smooth on a piece of metal, and you got a couple burrs on there or something, a little sharp points. So you got to cut that off. That's like a bad trait, and that takes work. And that hurts. The metal doesn't,
Yeah, it gets hot.
If you're the metal, right? Yeah, you're losing a part of yourself. That's a little bit of who you are. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Kind of why we talk about all this is this idea that actually, like if you've read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, I'm working through that right now. I haven't finished it yet. But his first chapter, he talks about this idea of like stand up with your shoulders straight.
Not that posture. Yeah.
No, don't we all? Sorry. But with that, the idea is that your physical posture actually can sometimes affect your mental posture.
Yeah.
And so we talk about this idea as far as like, what's your personality? How do you think? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How do you approach them? How do you build resilience? It really all starts with, am I willing to like take on challenge and do hard things?
Yeah.
And if you are slouched physically,
Mm-hmm.
if you like, that often will reflect mentally.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you look like you're not confident, typically, not all the time, but typically,
Right.
that plays out in a lack of confidence in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I'm passionate about, kind of with this whole idea of living the well-prepared life, is not letting life pass you by and not letting life just make decisions for you,
Mm-hmm.
but you make the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an area I have struggled in a lot. I think I noticed myself as being low self-worth, self-value kind of thing, low self-confidence. So it portrays in my actions and even the way I have conversations. It's like, I'm insecure about certain things. So I need to talk over them and show that I do have worth, or, I don't know. That's one example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So leaning into this idea of like standing up with your shoulders straight, how do you think that idea like helps you as far as like,
I think it is a like a fake it till you make it kind of thing. It's like, if I have a posture, even like wardrobe as well, wearing more professional attire instead of jeans and a t-shirt, you have a professional mindset about yourself. You see yourself in the mirror like, oh, I am this. Yeah, and if you're not a fan of Peterson, I'd say that those studies are true based on other research, because I watched a TED Talk. It came to mind is if you put a pencil in your mouth and you fake a smile for 10 minutes, like, you'll be happier. You'll be less negative. So, and you have, positions of dominance. If you open up your arms a little bit more and spread open a little bit more, you'll have a more confident persona, I guess. So,
yeah.
So I think it does help.
Yeah. So there's the physical element that leads to a mental element, but it also is like a posture of how you approach people around you and how you approach life.
Yeah.
That like, if you stand with confidence, you allow yourself to help have a mental perspective of like, I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I can make this change in my life.
Right.
I might need help.
Yeah.
I might need to lean into community, but I can lean into community.
Yeah.
I can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Versus like, nobody wants to know about me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody like cares what I think.
Not interesting. I'm not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, when you have just a small amount of self-confidence, and confidence that comes from like just value in who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things too, that people, they think they have to offer something to have confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not true.
Yeah.
Like, you have value and influence as a person.
Right.
And so because you are somebody, it's like that is alive and here, and you're a person of like intrinsic value, your opinions and ideas have worth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, if you come from that perspective where it's like, I don't even need to be the most experienced guy in the room, but I come from a spot of like, no, I do have ideas and things I can offer. Now, you need to be wise.
Right.
Like, as far as like, depending on the
Realistic.
context and that,
Yeah.
but it's like, if you have friends and you're like, you want to go out somewhere, but you're the person that never says where you want to go,
Yeah.
but you're like, you have an actual opinion, that might be a one small way where you can be like, hey, like,
Care if we do this?
yeah, can we do, like, I want to go here.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you tend to be the person that never voices opinion, they're more likely to be like, oh, yeah, let's do that.
All right. Sounds good.
Maybe not always. Like, I don't want to paint a picture as far as like life isn't always fair and straightforward. But like, leaning into confidence is something that will benefit you across the board. And it's kind of like this idea of like building resilience, owning yourself, and like really like leaning into personal responsibility and taking responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
And like the idea that we talked about, like nurturing growth, that like, you're not going to do these things if you don't think you're worth growing. Like,
yeah, and I'd say it's a very good help to identify your goals. We talked about that last week.
Yeah.
Your beliefs and values. If you have a goal and you want to reach it, identifying where you're at and who you are kind of helps you get there the most efficient way. So, if, like the thought that comes to mind is that the goal is the destination on a map, but you're in a car, you're in a boat, you're figure out what vehicle you're in, figure out what the horsepower is in that vehicle, kind of thing. So you could go up a mountain. Maybe Subaru is nicer, a Jeep is nicer vehicle for that than a Ford Focus, something like that. If you're trying to get there really quick, maybe something with a little bit more horsepower is good for that. So I think it's good. This is the metaphor that comes to mind, is that if you have a destination you want to get there, it's good to know what vehicle you're in to be able to get there the most efficient way.
Yeah. I think that's good. In the area of like building the well-prepared life, again, like we talked about this in the first episode, but you can't do this alone.
Yeah.
You need community to do this well.
Yeah.
And so there are a couple tools that I want to talk about that you do with other people around you that can help you learn more about yourself and help you grow. And so the first one, I'm going to throw this up on the screen so you guys can see it at home, but it's this idea of Johari's window. And basically, it's this thing where you have you have a box with 4 different areas in it. And so in the top left, you have an open area. And this is an area that's known by yourself and known by others. This is something everyone knows about you.
Okay.
And so like one of the areas that would be like this for most people, for me, is like just a simple thing is I'm good at tech.
Yeah.
Like as far as I'm good at production type stuff, that's my job. People know that about me. Then there are the areas where, like in the top right, where it's a blind area. So these are things that other people know about me, but I don't know about myself. So it's hard to like list anything current because I don't know about myself.
Right.
But like this would be like a good example was when it was like revealed to me of, hey, you're not leading your team well by caring for them well. Like you're not leading relationally and like if you don't change. So that was a blind spot. Like I didn't realize that I wasn't caring for them well. Then there's an area on the bottom left, number 3, it's the hidden area. And this is something that you know, but other people don't know. And so like, these are like things as far as like your feelings is a good example of this, as far as only you really know how you feel.
Your self-value.
Your thoughts, your values.
Yeah.
Now you can tell other people this and there are other areas where it's like things that you like, things you don't like. And some people may know them, other people won't. But that's your hidden area. And then the 4th is your bottom right quadrant. And that's the unknown area. These are the things that you don't know about yourself. Other people don't know about you. Typically, these would be things that are like more in the subconscious.
Yeah.
If you constantly do something, but you don't know why you do it, and somebody else couldn't point out why you do it, that's probably in that unknown area.
I gotcha.
As far as something you're like, I don't know why, but I just can't put down sodas.
Yeah.
Like I have to drink it. Like it's there. I have to drink one. Like that's something that I have struggled with. And I'm like, it's more in the hidden / like open area at this point. Maybe some blind spots as far as other people could say like, hey, you do that. And here might be why.
Yeah.
But the idea that with this, and this image I think points it out well, is like your top things are things that you kind of need to ask about. So your open area and blind area, as far as like, you can ask what people know about you. But like an area to grow is to be like, hey, like, let's like get a friend, work through this box and kind of talk about open areas, share something from your hidden area, and then ask for something that they see in you that they don't think that you know about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like, that's a tool that you can use with a close friend.
Yeah.
And it'd be somebody that you trust.
Because you're going to have a bias. You're going to think either too low or too high of yourself a lot of times.
Yeah.
So
you can work through that and then kind of do it with each other, where it's like he does the same thing. As far as like, hey, here's something I think we both know about each other. Here's an area where it's like, you probably don't know this about me. And then what's something that you think that I don't know about myself?
Yeah.
And these could be good things.
Yeah.
It's not always a critique. It could be an encouragement as far as like, hey, you do this. I'm not sure that when you do this, you know the impact that it has.
That's good.
Another tool is something called a 360 assessment. And there's a bunch of different variations of this. And basically, like, it's a great way to learn about yourself from other people and see what people notice and what people notice both in good and bad side of things.
Okay.
And so this is one of the areas where it's like, you need to be ready for some hard feedback.
Yeah.
So if you're like, I can't take it if somebody tells me I'm like in a bad spot or they don't like how I do something, then it's probably something you need to like work up to. Do the Johari's window with a close friend, or do this with just a couple people first.
Okay.
But here's the idea is like, so you have 3 groups of people that lead you or have authority over you in some way, people that are your peers. So people you work with, they're just your peers and friends, and people that look up to you or that you lead.
Okay.
And I say it that way specifically where it's like, you may not be in a leadership position at work, but it's like, say you have a cousin or say like a younger sibling or somebody that looks up to you in whatever area of life you are in. Like that's like the 3 categories. And this is my challenge. So I want you to ask 2 or 3 people this week.
Okay.
Or whenever, 2 or 3 people sometime after listening to this, in each category for 2 questions.
Okay.
First, ask them, what are 3 things that they admire about you, or 3 things that they have like they're good reputations that you have. So they see you and they think this is a good thing about you.
Okay.
And what are 3 things that they would change if they could, or bad reputations that they have?
Okay.
That's oftentimes the more revealing one. But sometimes it's cool. Like, I did this and was super encouraged because one of the things that people pointed out to me was how like how positively I talk about my wife all the time.
That's good.
And I was like, oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know that I would have like pointed that out as my own thing, but I'm like, oh, that's so good.
Yeah. That's good.
And encouraging is something that was good.
Yeah.
Have you ever done anything like that before?
No. Usually it's other people telling me like when it needs to be addressed. I've asked at work, like, hey, what are your thoughts on like how can I improve?
Mm-hmm. What have you gotten from that?
Sometimes it's like, is this a trick question? I'm like, no, I really want to know how I can improve. So they try to find something on the spot. They're not prepared for it. They usually are, supervisors with employees are usually not trying to be critical unless it's necessary.
Yeah.
For the most part, I just feel like that's true. I could be wrong. I have no data to back it up. But so when the window is there, I try to take advantage of it, of asking for feedback, but I haven't just randomly like, hey, just curious, what are 3 things that you think is good and what are 3 things that you think is bad? Because I feel like that is a very uncomfortable conversation to just start up. So
and that's where it's important to pick people that you trust.
Yeah.
And with the 360 assessment, you don't necessarily have to trust them as much as far as like, these are just people that you work with maybe.
Yeah.
But they do need to be somebody that's like, this isn't somebody that's like a work enemy.
Yeah. Right.
Or somebody that you're constant, like you don't ask this to somebody that like looks down on you or doesn't like, that you're like have bad interactions all the time.
Right.
This is somebody that's like you're generally amiable or have good relationship with.
You got to be willing to hear the bad stuff.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You got to be ready to, take some hits.
Yeah. So we talked about this idea as far as what kind of person are you?
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about the ideas of like strengths and weaknesses. How do you tick? Kind of like how do you learn more about yourself? Figure out your blind spots. And all this kind of points this idea of like, are you the person that's willing to do what it takes to make changes in your life?
Yeah.
So kind of from that realm, what do you say to like summarize some of the things we talked about to be like, okay, like we have these different ideas and different perspectives. How do we take that and put it together to be like, what's like the next step of like, how are you willing to like make the changes that we talked about? It's like from the last podcast, as far as what do you want?
Right.
And like what it takes to get there. So like,
so summarize the,
or just what are your final thoughts kind of from that?
Yeah, I'd say it's good to know where your starting point is. It's good to know what kind of engine you're running in your car to be able to get there. That's the metaphor that keeps coming to mind. It's like if I got a very, very slow car and I want to get to California, I got to be patient with myself. It's be okay with the car that I got, but know that this is a struggle. Trying to think of how to summarize this. That's the only thing I got is that car analogy.
Yeah.
That's the best one I got.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good picture as far as like, you're not going to make progress on your life unless you're willing to make changes.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you got to at least have a small level of self-confidence.
That's good. When you're saying like, what does resiliency need? What character trait? I'd say self-confidence. Because if you don't think you can handle, you don't think you can do X, Y, Z, you're not going to be able to overcome this challenge. So,
yeah. And so that's what I encourage you with is like self-confidence comes again, like I said, from like your inherent value. It's like in your identity. And if you find your identity in the things that you do, that's going to make life real hard for you.
Yeah.
Because when you mess up, it's going to show.
Yeah.
And so that's my encouragement is like for us as believers in Christ, our identity is found in Him and who He's created us to be as image bearers of God. And so when we look at our identity as that, it's not in what we do. It's not in how we perform. It's not in what we think.
Right.
It's in who we are made to be.
Right.
And like as far as like our actual like how we've been designed. And so when it comes from that type of thing, that's just an inherent value of who you are, and that's where your confidence and identity comes from. That's when you can like have confidence that's not based out of like results.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
just in any situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can have confidence because you're like, no, like my value isn't determined by how well I do or don't do.
That's good.
Yeah. And so,
because you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's like the kind of thing I would leave you with is work on your identity and what it looks like to have confidence and lean into these things as far as like that when somebody gives you a critique to know that like, okay, I'm going to take that. I'm going to learn from it.
Right.
And if it's something that you're like, you know what, I don't actually think that's like an issue. Now do that in humility.
Yeah.
But if somebody gives you critique it's like, hey, you just give too many ideas.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Oh.
Or like as far as
you're
like
too confident.
Yeah.
Like, well, be more specific. Like, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if it's
What's
like,
wrong
hey,
with it?
you bowl over other people's ideas and don't think about them when you give your ideas, that's one thing.
Very specific. Yeah.
But if it's like, hey, you just have a lot of ideas and I don't think that's like okay,
yeah,
it's like, okay, I don't see the problem with that.
I like to think.
Yeah.
I got opinions.
And so
Yeah.
take people's like feedback with a grain of salt, but take it in humility and like, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
And move forward and do it from a place of like, my value isn't in what they say about me. My value is in who I am as a person.
That's really good. I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And I hope this is helpful in kind of just thinking through this idea of like, what kind of person are you and what it takes to like take steps towards those things that you want in life. And so we will see you next week on the Well Prepared Life podcast as we forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility.
Nice.